artist tonight is Duncan Simcoe. His exhibition is in the museum. It's Night Visions, the drawings of Duncan Simcoe, 2014 to 2024. It's on view through November 9th, so if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, the museum will be open tomorrow. Duncan taught at Cal Baptist in Riverside for nearly 30 years and served as the program chair there. His art is in the Vatican Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, the Orange County Museum of Art, and the Grunwald Center for Graphic Arts at UCLA, and many more collections. And our curator tonight is Gordon Fuglie. Gordon is a Southern California art historian and independent curator. And Gordon has worked in curatorial affairs at the UCLA Grunwald Center for Graphic Arts, the LeBond Art Gallery at Loyola Marymount, and the San Luis Obispo Museum of Art. Please welcome us tonight with Duncan Simcoe and Gordon Fuglie.
Thank you. Our proceedings are going to be a bit on the informal side, a combination of a very personalistic art historical overview, and then a dialogue between Duncan and myself, and then Duncan holding forth as only he can do on his work. So, our relation, this exhibition and the publication wouldn't be possible without a relationship that began some 35 years ago. Was involved with the progressive Christian art scene in Southern California, among other things. And Duncan his work came into view, and in 1994, I had the opportunity to do a monographic piece on him in Image Journal. So this is the 30th anniversary of our first professional collaboration. So,
but who's counting?
So, and we both have backgrounds in Orange County. I'm a bit more senior than Duncan, but my education was at Orange Coast College, where I took my first art courses, and then went on to get a BA in studio art at Cal State Fullerton. Duncan got his undergraduate degree at California Baptist, and on our way to getting more serious about my studio work, which later became art historical, and then Duncan's studio work, started with a Time Life book. I don't know if any of you, but these were wonderful things. If you had a burgeoning interest in art history, wanted to know about artists of the past, Time Life published 28 of these. This one, my main man, Albrecht Dürer. The interesting thing about them is they were not just a monograph, but it was the world of Cezanne, Dürer, Rubens, etc. So that you got a good introduction to the artist, but then the whole environment in which this artist worked, and featuring other artists who may have influenced them or who succeeded them later on. And the interesting thing about this series is they were written by the top flight journalists in the Time Life stable, but they were not art historians. So these journalists had to be guided by senior art historians. I mean, these are A-listers that, of course, only Time Life could afford. And so what you got was a very clearly written a overview, and that got you more curious, as we both can testify, about the particular artists or other artists that we went on to read about. And when I went to UCLA and began my art historical studies, the way to study art was then now contextual. So you didn't just have a single artist that you studied or a style that you studied, but you looked at the environment in which that artist worked. Little did I said, my gosh, they were doing that in Time Life in the late 60s. So Duncan has, as he's developed as an artist, been always an investigator of art history. And he's in dialogue with art history as well as producing his own work. That going deeper meant that I wound up at UCLA getting my MA there. I worked at as Ella said, worked at the Grunwald Center, a collection of works on paper. Duncan went on to get his MFA at Cal State Long Beach, and they had, I think, could you say it was one of the strongest painting departments in Southern California in the late 80s?
Yes, I mean, it was located towards, let's call it traditional aesthetics, and strongly drawing and painting. As distinct from other options, UCI was a highly conceptual, for example,
Right.
program, and usually very ideological in nature. So yeah, Cal State was a good grounding in the techniques and application of drawing and painting.
So from those beginnings, here we are now. Duncan has produced a really compelling body of work, which is called the Black Drawings, and we are pleased to have gathered it here and then document it with the catalog that Westmont has helped us produce and design, and we're really proud of it. Prior to this, I thought I would have done the last thing in my career, and that was to do this anthology on the California architect Julia Morgan, but it was the world of Julia Morgan. So you see all the architects that in San Francisco that she was influenced by, and you got a sense of how she studied architecture in Paris, and what it was like to be a woman studying architecture in Paris at all-male studios. And so this is a nice, I thought, well, I'd be done, and Duncan's project came up at Westmont, so I'm glad that I was able to continue on exploring art that fascinates me and the viewer. So in addition to our schooling and our career, our journeys in our careers have been as people of faith. Both Duncan and I were raised in the Lutheran Church, and what got me the first compelling image I saw was a stained glass window that had Jesus in Gethsemane, and the way the light hit that, because the sun would be coming in, it was just, it's the first astonishing image because of its luminosity. And you saw the windows in your church in orange?
Oh, you bet.
Okay.
It was built by the German immigrant community, and they made a nice mock Gothic cathedral, kind of a pint-sized one with very large-scale stained glass windows. Probably the same image of Jesus in the garden.
Yes.
You bet. Yeah.
Both of us have gone through evangelical periods in our faith journeys, and I have learned much from that and grateful for that. But the historical church and theology from the centuries summoned me, and so I've wound up in the Episcopal or the Anglican Church. Duncan has gone even to a more ancient faith, Eastern Orthodoxy. Is it a Greek Orthodox, Russian, or what?
I attend a Greek Orthodox parish.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And as you know, imagery was foundational for the Orthodox faith, where icons comprise a major element in the church itself. Yeah. Do you have a question?
No, I had a mosquito or something.
So here we are now, a couple of baby boomers who persisted in our Christian faith, grew in it, and we've seen this, the period that we've lived through up to now, probably the greatest change in religious practice and evolution in American history. When I was attending church with my parents, didn't everybody do that, as a kid? And now we have Christian nationalism. We've got people leaving the faith. We've got new faiths. We've got new expressions. And so I think we're going to be through this, going through this turbulent period for a little while longer. So, okay, let's move into the my personalistic art overview. When I was studying, taking my first studio courses at college, it was obvious that the message we were getting is that New York is where it's at. If you wanted to be an artist, you go to New York. You should learn how to draw the figure, but I mean, really, does anybody do figures anymore? Did you ever get any of that? Well, no, not at Long Beach, you didn't.
No, I entered the fray through a community college. It was really lowbrow, but minimalism was the thing.
Ah, okay.
Minimalism, yeah.
So, and that was, of course, the apex years of modernism. And as I began to go visit galleries on my own, our professor would say, oh, go see this show, go to that museum show. And there was these rising California artists, and they could care less about New York. People like Ed Ruscha, Billy L. Bankston, the outrageous works of Ed Kienholz and Duncan admires. This was definitely stuff that could only be done on the West Coast. And as things came to be, by 1990, Southern California, Greater Los Angeles, whatever, had become a national and international art center and was being recognized as such. And so let's go into some of the art that Duncan had seen. Back to the first one. This is a work, one of his last representational or figurative works. And maybe you can tell us a little bit what Diebenkorn has meant to you, because in our past conversations, you've said he was important in your thinking as you were developing.
Well, I was strongly attracted to his work. Ironically, because of his great sophistication with color. So that's somehow drained out of my own practice. But at the time, it was a linchpin to work I identified with as a 12 or 13-year-old looking at Impressionists. He operated with largely an Impressionist palette. So I was attracted to that. His, I don't know how to characterize it, rigorous, insistent sense of form and the graphic nature of commonplace scenes like this neighborhood, which normally you'd never look at twice. Why? But he could render this really compelling compositional structure out of these ordinary commonplace scenes. And then there was this facility with paint handling, which was just revelatory to me at that time. I'd never really seen process amplified in the context of very conventional subjects. So I think those three things, palette, composition, process, were things that really caught my eye.
Okay. This is an abstract work. You probably, it's not just, I'm going to go out and paint the Ingleside neighborhood and the Bay Area as it actually is. Diebenkorn was very famous for distilling the environment around him, equivalent to you going out into suburbia and meditating on what you see out there. Let's go to the next slide. These are his abstract works, but are based in what he saw around Santa Monica, in his studio in coastal Santa Monica, and he would distill that into an abstraction. Some of the ones that are blue, for instance, would be looking at the ocean, or you can see the angles it's in looking at the side of a building, things you could see out his studio window or by walking around the area he lived in. Okay, let's go to the next one. This could only, an image that could only have been done by a California artist. This is obviously Nathan Oliveira. And what interested me about this is that when you look at Diebenkorn and Duncan's earlier work, which we'll get to in a moment, these large areas, color areas of really obviously brushed paint. This is not, he's not, Oliveira and Duncan and Diebenkorn were not people trying to tidy it up, but they really wanted to have the sense of what the paint looked like as it was in process, as it was worked on the surface. And when Oliveira was being told that, oh, you don't want to do a figure, he said, to hell with that, I'm going to do a figure. And he did a number of these single standing figures, as well as paintings that featured, of all things, the unfashionable subject of birds towards the end of his life. Okay, let's go to the next one. This is, these two, the prior two were examples of late modernism. This is a postmodern image It is obviously ironic because there is a kind of, shall we say, a canned image of a ship fire. This woman was the artist who actually painted the backdrops on Ed Ruscha's large paintings, and he would come in and write a kind of textual commentary on top of it. So she thought, well, if Ed can get a show with those, I'll try and do these. It's kind of an ironic work. It has a deadpan sensibility, even though the subject is literally incendiary. It seems to owe something from 19th century romantic painting, creating this illusion. But as I'm studying this, there may be fire, but the work lacks emotional heat. I was not a fan of the postmodern period by and large. Okay, let's go to the last West Coast artist. Yeah, Peter Alexander. He had a studio in Venice, and he actually started making some paintings on black velvet, swap meet art, if you will. He was really willing to defy conventions, but then he had this inspiration that, the black really has power. And when I see it, he's saying to himself, it's when I'm coming back from New York and I'm coming into LAX, and this is what's below me. This is a whole series based on the atmospheres that he saw at night, and then the great expansion of the LA suburban and urban landscape. It became a subject that almost seems so obvious, but his aestheticizing what he saw out the window of his jet, or later he had a pilot actually fly him around to look down below. This is what I would call a postmodern, because he is excited about the subject. He wants to convey what he has seen and what we all could see if we actually looked out that airplane window. And now we come into a gallery, and it has been transformed into an aesthetic experience. Okay, that's our Southern California introduction. Let's look at some of Duncan's early work. This is a piece from 1989. That was the same year that I started as the director of the LeBand Art Gallery at Loyola Marymount. So this is Duncan doing a unreligious religious painting, shall we say. And there's some depth to pop art, the Santa Fe logo being used. The Santa Fe literally means holy faith. And he has taken a picture frame and put on the painting, and it's we read it as a crucifixion, but actually it's a runner coming across the finish line, as I recall, right? Yeah. And notice the expanses of color that we saw in Diebenkorn and in Oliveira, vigorously brushed surfaces. So a conversation I had when the exhibit opened here at the end of August is that problem with trying to do contemporary Christian art is you do not want to get into fall into the trap where you're doing stuff that, we should hang that in a church. It's where it belongs. But you want to have your expression of faith out in the contemporary world. And that has been Duncan's challenge and his vocation for years. Okay, let's look at another work. Brown, Green, and Dry from about a year later. You want to talk about this a little bit?
Well, sure. So as a practice, I've often dipped into very personal content and also stuff outside of me. So I frame it up as interior and exterior provocations. So this particular painting was a very interior one. My wife and I were struggling with infertility, and so it was a deeply personal image and way of talking back into a personal experience. Yeah. Other things I could say is what? It also draws on things that I had a direct reference to. That is the Santa Ana Mountains. If any of you are down there in Orange County, that's a familiar skyline. And so there they are, Santa Ana Mountains. And periodically we go through droughts. So there was an attempt to relate the environment to the physical environment. Something that's struggling to grow, if you will.
Yeah. And in a kind of postmodern gesture, he has violated the picture plane by putting a extension above the rectangle, which you're depicting a cloud.
Yeah, there's a tiny little cloud.
A rain cloud, which is a symbol of fructifying.
Yeah.
And below that is this kind of a sketch of an ovum, as I recall. Yeah. All right, next one. Like Diebenkorn, Duncan draws from his environment, and who among us hasn't been in a supermarket parking lot and seen these scattered around? The work is these shopping carts are symbols for a sense of feeling of abandonment. If you're, I think both Duncan and I would say that, you know, as people of faith, there are times we wonder, where is God? You know, where you know, we feel God's presence, but it's also absent. You know, there's a struggle. And that's normal for the faith. It comes as part of the package, if you will. So, and then I believe you lived near some railroad tracks.
You know, at that time, my studio was adjacent to some railroad tracks in the city of Santa Ana.
Mm-hmm.
So I just saw stuff every day as I went to and fro from the studio. There's a kind of a Diebenkorn-esque simplification of that environment. And so there's just a little reference there in the top right corner of the tracks. But, you know, this is something you commonly see because the homeless, of course, use the carts as their mobile homes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The last work that we want to show, I think you can best express your interest in its beginning source. Yeah.
Okay, this takes a little explaining. What we haven't seen before was a body of works that was generated from a biblical narrative, Abraham and his progeny, Isaac and Ishmael. And yeah, so I had approached it from a more narrative, experiential point of view for a handful of years. At a certain point, I became aware that the figure of Ishmael, who particularly drew my attention, because he's the outsider and the outcast and a variety of things, had been used and was prominent in Southern literature in the 19th century. I remember being on a plane flight somewhere and I was reading a literary journal for some reason, and all up came these references. And so that really attracted my attention, and I began investigating 19th century images, specifically going back to the Civil War, because I also had a Golden Book of the Civil War book as a kid, so I was very familiar with its little treasure trove of period photographs or illustrations and so forth. So with that idea of Ishmael as a cultural player in the American conversation, I started appropriating imagery from that book and pairing it with this one-legged black mannequin that I actually used as a drawing prop in my drawing classes at the college. So I had that on hand. I can't even remember where I got it, but it was such a compelling little thing because it was a one-legged mannequin, as is. This is fairly literal. And inserting it in the context of some of these historical and received images And so that produced the Golden Book of the Civil War series that ran approximately through 2000. This is a small study, probably 7 by 9 inches, something like that.
And in previous conversations with Duncan, part of this series is meant to be a kind of corrective to the earlier historical accounts of the Civil Wars, where it's all drums and bugles and banners and so forth, where these works go into the cause of the Civil War. And so the presence of African American figures is a signifier of that. Okay. All right, now let's go into night visions. And what this curator was thankful for is that Duncan's body of work had 4 themes. So that kind of gives me a roadmap of where to begin as a curator. And then how would those themes fit into the museum itself? And thankfully, Chris was offered some flexible suggestions, and so that was very helpful in how to place the themes within the museum space, so that the viewer could not say, oh, well, means of conveyance, oh, that was in that room, and oh, now it's in the, there's also one in the entry hall. No, we want to concentrate them as close together as we can, so that you can go from one interpretation of the theme to another. So, all right. And also, what made this a little easier for me to work with is that some of these works are really large, like 115 inches wide, so that kind of makes your placement a lot easier. Okay, so means of conveyance. Conveyance, of course, is literally to carry one thing or transport it from this place over to that place. And of course, in Duncan's work, that could be a thing, a person, or an idea. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that theme developed?
Sure. In a very real way, of the 4 kind of clumps of black drawings that you'll see in the show, the means of conveyance had the least amount of intention about it. A myth in Burbia, I knew I was going at that. Candelabras, yeah, I'm going to make those. These kind of crept up on me. I have stacks of old Time Life magazines, Look magazine. Anybody actually remember Look magazine from the 50s and 60s?
Dating yourself.
And I'll just randomly page through those and just, whatever, tear out a provocative image for whatever reason, for whatever. So I just have some of these images, and I'm quite willing to just run with an image that has got my attention without a lot of analysis. And so this particular image of a sailing boat was one of those. I pulled it out of I think it was a Look magazine, and I just liked it. It was sort of a little kid thing. I always liked sailing boats as a kid and images of them. And I didn't know what to do with it other than I wanted to draw it. And I thought I would make a small drawing. I have issues with scale, apparently. So, and then it just kept wanting to get bigger and bigger. So the beautiful thing about the tar paper is I can just tear off more pieces of it and stick it on the wall, so things can grow or shrink or change configuration. So this one just kept getting bigger and bigger, and I also realized that at a certain point I didn't really literally want that boat. This is kind of an impossible sailboat if anybody has any familiarity with these kinds of structures. It's way too long, it has way too many masts. So it's more about boat or sailing, in this kind of macro sense. So that just popped out. Similar with spiral staircases So I was just doing or allowing some images to come forth that I didn't have an initial location for. Subsequently, after, I don't know, 4 years or something of seeing these, I'm thinking, oh, well, these are actually linked. They're all about transiting things. Okay, I've got a new category. So it was a backward-looking organization to put on images that really had come into being from an intuitive process. Yeah.
Back to the ship, if you will. Yeah, it's a visionary, a generously visionary ship. And as I read it, notice that it's sailing out of bad weather and into this luminous zone here. Duncan's fondness for phthalo green as a luminous source, light source. And one of the things he didn't tell you is that he had listened to a Curator recording. What's it called? The Harbor of Love?
The Harbor of Love.
Harbor of Love, which is actually a bluegrass Stanley Brothers song. And it's the lyric is that all these souls were going to come gathered in the ship at the end of time and brought into the Harbor of Love. And so this is the visionary ship that is carrying them into the light.
I got to point out that I had gotten that CD for reasons just because I like Curator, and just happened to be playing it while I was working on the painting. And all of a sudden, I become aware of, oh, that's what this is, or that's informing this. So again, a total lack of pre-planning on my part. I want to emphasize that. These things kind of fell into. And the great ship will carry us into the Harbor of Love. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to the next one. Would you talk about, these I think are your more accessible symbols because we can, staircases and journey in life and going up and down and so forth. Please hold forth on them.
Well, let's see. Exit 2018. So that's a little misleading. I actually began the drawing earlier than that, about 2015. Some drawings will take some years. You work on them to a certain extent. They kind of reach a dead end for whatever reason, put them aside, grab something else, and then come back. So this would be true of that. And I had lost my late wife to cancer in 2013. And so, again, initially, I just liked the image. That was all I was aware of in selecting it. And I thought it was a hard thing to draw. And literally, I was just looking for hard things to draw. So a spiral staircase is kind of a hard thing to draw. So I thought, okay, well, that's fine. And then as I'm working on it, I'm thinking, oh, this is a spiral staircase. Oh, what do you do on those? Well, yes. It's a means of conveyance to take you to the next level. And so then it clicked, oh, I must be responding to my late wife's passing and her exit from this plane of life. So there's a little flourishy thing at the top that's sort of, movement driven, like something passing.
A sense of departure.
And and I like that as well. For artists, if you're going to work and allow yourself to work with very personal content, I mean, one, it's a real blessing to have that possibility to do it. So you can talk back to events. On the other hand, it can, forgive me, it can be kind of self-indulgent and kind of literal and obvious and even corny to do so. And I might have great benefit for the person doing it. That's fine. That's art therapy territory. But for me, it's always important that the image functions as art. Whatever I'm bringing to it or investing in it on a personal level, it still has to work as art. And so there's, I don't know what to call it, a tension or something between a relatively impersonal way of representing something as over and against a very kind of personal load of content that the resulting image may actually carry for me.
Mhm.
So, and so.
Mhm. Let's look at the last one from means of conveyance. There we go. There's actually two panels here. You can see a slight horizontal line above the heads of the figures. That's part two of the painting, if you will. And if you could talk about that and the meaning of cloud cover.
Sure. Well, this one was what I would call an exterior stimuli or provocation. This is coming from the Black Lives Matter movement and the great social difficulties that were popping up just a few years back. And I wanted to respond to that. I wanted to talk back to that. The question is how. So I found one of these old images, I think from a 1956 magazine, I can't remember which one, about some domestic unrest in the Dominican Republic at that time. And there were this group of obviously African descent folks carrying away someone who had been shot or otherwise wounded in one of these fracases. And I thought, that's it. It's not literally derived from the present situation, but I thought it evoked it or got around it in a really kind of satisfying way. And then the idea of cloud cover, because this stuff was happening all over the country, as you know, is it seemed or it felt like cloud cover for the whole country, like this unfortunate cloud had just blanketed everything. So that's where the notion of cloud cover came from. So let's see. The slide is a little dim, but you can see that the supine figure, his t-shirt, is actually just an extension of the cloud cover from the top element there. And as I was working on this one, I also became aware of what I thought was sort of a resemblance to an El Greco painting, the Burial of Count Orgaz, which I'd seen 25 years before in Spain, about the Count who was also passed, and he's surrounded by this cloud of people, and then there's this general movement up into the heavens that El Greco often did, so you could see Christ in his glory and so forth, kind of receiving this guy's soul. So that kind of went off in my head as well. Yeah.
Okay, move into the next theme. What is your interest in the desert?
Well, I like the desert as a space. But it also, shows up in the Bible metaphorically as kind of a place of exile. If you were old a hermit or St. Anthony or somebody, you'd go out into the desert to get away from, to flee and encounter God in this very direct and vivid kind of way. leading into the tradition of the Desert Fathers and Mothers. So that became a kind of a pull for me because that's within my tradition as an Orthodox guy. And it also seemed to describe my own sense of grief or grieving after my wife passed. You were kind of sent into the desert where everything's dry and lifeless and painful. Yeah. And so that's where the initial impetus to use references to the desert came from.
Okay. Now go to a slide. Ooh, these are not doing justice.
Oh, man.
They kind of washed out.
You can almost see something.
Yeah.
Dark in the room.
Can we turn the lights on?
I think I'll leave the lights on for the recording,
But come see the
Oh.
works in person, because
I
it's
think we can turn the lights up there.
Yeah, but then the recording.
Well, are they gonna,
Okay.
the video might be an
Yeah.
issue.
As I interpret, the full image is on the left, and as I interpret it as a curator, this is a stylized, highly stylized, verticalized depiction of a euphorbia, which is a kind of exuberant succulent, and he's using that as a kind of, I said, could this be holy fire in the desert? As Duncan mentioned, the encounter with the divine when you're out in the desert, as the church fathers were in the 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. And Duncan cues us into that by rendering California's own most recognizable growth in the desert, a Joshua tree, which was also, as you may recall, remember from the 1980s, a breakthrough album for U2. Next. Now this interested me because we're in the desert, but yet we have people previously submerged becoming immersed. This is Duncan has a personal explanation for this, but sometimes being submerged feels like a place of exile, and being underwater is kind of maybe its own sense of desert and abandonment. Do you want to jump off from that?
Okay. Well, once attuned into this motif of upward moving effervescence as a evocation of holiness or transcendence or something, then I moved different kinds of imagery into it. And in this case, this swimming couple who are staring at each other through their masks. And that was inspired really by my current wife. I have remarried. And my sense that we were shipwreck survivors, if you will, kind of bobbing around in the sea, and found each other. So again, moving to a very personal, kind of autobiographical reference.
Okay. Next slide. I want to congratulate Duncan for coining a neologism. That's a new word, myth in Burbia. And this goes to finding in depictions kind of panoramic views, very linear and minimal of the typical housing tract homes, and making that a backdrop for a revelation. Duncan has philosophically and critically spoken of suburbia, which is a place of no real history. Suburbia has no organic architectural history. The banality of suburbia is a social commentary we're all familiar with. You might get a home with some decorative touches on the outside, that sort of thing, or a nice picture window to look out onto the other homes. So let's look at the first slide. And the picture window becomes a place for another image, interrupting the wide view of the house. Duncan, you want to rain in the desert? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, this is one of the earliest images where I appropriated desert imagery, the earliest pieces. And it was, again, very much autobiographical. I was grieving my first wife's passing, so very literally what it felt like was the desert had moved into the house, the place you're living. You're actually living in the desert, it's inside of your home. Which reverses, the natural assumption that you look out your picture window to see some kind of vista. So I like standing that idea on its head. And then, there is this kind of effluviance of rain falling, but it's falling outside of the house. It doesn't get inside. Yeah. Okay.
So from rain, next to fire starter. Okay. This is a huge image. We have a cul-de-sac, and at the end of the cul-de-sac, there's this frightening, super monumental apparition, seemingly, and then she has ignited this house, turning it into a molten ingot almost, and sending the sparks out down into the out onto the main boulevard. I've took particular notice of the, I don't know how intentional this was, but you have this fiery eruption in bland suburbia and this empty container down at lower right, emptiness to the flaming energetic source in the image. And so from rain to fire. It is a truly alarming kind of image. The idea of here's the detail. So, any commentary you want to make, Duncan?
Well, really the initial image, this is a response to art history. And a particular painting by El Greco that simply started coming back to my recollection. I had I'd taken art history, of course, as a young fella, and the endless series of slides on the projector and Jansen's art history book with their questionable reproductions, So when it got to El Greco, I never really got it. I thought, well, these are kind of weird paintings, but I just don't like them much. They don't seem to draw me. My wife and I went to Scotland and during my summer break from grad school and went to the Scottish National Gallery. And I'm walking along the Baroque section and I see this small painting. It's about this big, I think. And it's really riveting. And it's a nocturnal thing, and there are these three people, 2 people and a monkey, sorry. And there's a central candle that's illuminating everything, and everything else is just black. And I thought, wow, that's great. I really like this. So I go up and I look at the label, and it's El Greco. I go, nah, it can't be. His paintings are dingy, and they're just not that interesting. So I go back and look at it. Okay, sign me up. So I went to the front desk, and I'm looking for a postcard. Find it, look at it, and it looked like every other dingy El Greco I'd ever seen. They just don't print. And somehow, as I was rifling through my stock of suburban house photographs, boom, up pops this image of Firestarter. So I did it. So that was probably the most direct response to an art historical received image of the lot. The model is actually one of, at that time, a student. I made sit there and puff on things. Take photographs so I get the right shot. In terms of a specific kind of expressive load, I just held off from that. I mean, it could be interpreted a number of ways. It's a rather large or open image, and it can be filled with references in several ways, and I enjoy that possibility of constructing more open metaphors like this one. So.
Yeah, I think the scale that you use, which you start with the expansive sheet of tar paper, and let's go back to the image before this one. Yeah. So you can see that it's a very small part of the picture, but obviously an image within the picture of enormous power and attention drawing for the viewer. Okay.
Well, I like that as a strategy. The ability of a small rendered image to animate a large amount of space and sort of balancing the right proportion is enjoyable for me. It's an enjoyable part of the work, just formally speaking.
Okay. All right, let's go to the last image, the black box. This is how Duncan reflects on a horrific airline tragedy. It relates to Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, which took off to head to China from Malaysia and abruptly changed its course, cut off communications, and flew for hours at extremely high altitudes, and then plunged into the Indian Ocean. People were, how do we account for this? What happened? Was there something wrong with the pilot? That was this a sort of grand suicide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? How do we begin to explain it? And then people say, oh, if we could only get the black box, the flight recorder, which is actually orange, but it's called the black box, and that would explain everything. And Duncan was not quite satisfied that would explain everything. So I'll let you continue the narrative on that, the origins of your meditation on that incident.
Again, this is in 2014 when it began, and again, my first wife had just passed away a year before, so things about loss were kind of in my face. It was in my blood. So I was riveted by this event, and the frantic attempt to get to the black box to explain it. Everybody on the planet wanted to explain it. If it had been recovered, of course, all it would have explained was technical things, altitude, whatever systems were still operating, and that would be useful. But there were 239 people on that flight that thought they were going somewhere else that morning. And I don't know how many family members were on the other side expecting to receive those people. For them, it was not a technical explanation. It was why? Why am I suffering this loss? And for those kinds of explanations, that's religion. So I thought, well, I can make black boxes too. Tar paper's kind of black. I'll cut up 239 sheets for each person, stack them up, and we'll drop down relatively conventional images representing, we'll actually call it the four major faiths on the planet. So we have a Muslim prayer rug on the right, there's Shiva doing the divine dance in the center, and Adam and Eve. They're both to encompass, or hopefully encompass, the Judeo-Christian traditions. And with really a question, how would any of these explain to the people involved why? Would they be different explanations? Well, it's karma if you're a Hindu. I guess they just did something. If it's Muslim, I wouldn't pretend to speak for some of these traditions. But that was really the genesis. our collective human need to fill in blanks about difficult things and where we go to expect to receive answers, to fill in those blanks, was really the intent here. Lastly, you have to credit Gordon for its current state. He had seen the original attempt at this and had some good ideas about some alterations for this show. And I thought about it and I thought, dang, no, the guy's smart. You know, I should have thought about this or that or the other thing. And so I labored mightily over the summer for the show to retool it. And I'm very pleased with the way that it came out. No.
Would you be satisfied if someone called it a kind of memorial?
It could function that way.
Not solely as that, but it has a certain sensibility.
It certainly is about, you know, an event, a tragic event. So, sure, yeah. A memorial kind of with a big question mark, I guess, at the end of it.
Okay, that ends the presentation. We're opening up for questions from the audience or any further comments you may have. Sure.
I was fortunate to be able to go through it this afternoon, and I'm curious when you started working with the tar paper. Was that something early in your career, mid-career, late career?
I'd say mid-career,
Mid-career.
absolutely. I was not working on tar paper as a grad student. I hadn't seen anybody working on this stuff. And in fact, I kind of backed my way into it. There's a, anybody remember Robbie Robertson? Fans of the band out there somewhere? So he wrote a song in the 90s, and the chorus went, "I'm just trying to make the right mistake." And that just repeats several times. I'm just trying to make the right mistake. So I made the right mistake. I was at the tail end of the Golden Book work. I was involved in paintings that were taking me a lot of labor and time, 4 or 5 months for one. And I wanted to do other things. Other imagery was coming to mind. I thought, well, this is going to drive me nuts. I'm not that kind of a guy to just work at this pace. I can draw. I can draw fast. I draw well. I'll make some drawings for a given line of content. I wasn't satisfied with what I was seeing on my drawing table. I was doing relatively conventional things that I knew how to do. My drawing board at the time was pushpinned with a bunch of ancillary images, either cut out photographs or postcards and stuff, like a lot of artists have. So I'm looking around, feeling frustrated one day, and I just look up at my drawing board and I see this postcard I got in Spain years before of a black painting by Francisco Goya. I'd been there on a tour. And I really admired that particular painting and his work in general. And I thought, that's it. I want to do a black painting. I want it to feel like one of those things. So I want a black drawing. I want to do a black drawing. And I just sort of nervously glanced around my studio like one's just going to drop down from heaven or something, and you know. And I saw a roll of tar paper in the corner of my studio, which I had bought by mistake. I thought it was something else. I thought it was drywall paper. And I didn't know what to do with it, and this was some years before. I just didn't want to throw it out, so I just trudged it along with me. And so I looked at that and I thought, well, that looks pretty black, pretty close. I wonder if you can draw on it. So pull it out, start tearing off sheets and rubbing stuff on it to see what's going to stick and work formally. And that was it. I just made the right mistake. I bought a material I hadn't intended to get. And that was 2000. About 20 years ago. Yeah. Yeah.
Good mistake.
Hmm?
A good mistake.
I'm just trying to make the right mistake.
And your art supplier is Home Depot.
Well, I could talk at some length about the advantages. Look, for any artist working, you have to feel a natural affinity for the materials you're trying to work with, whatever that is, bronze, encaustic, clay, oil, whatever. It's got to feel like you can just go into it without a lot of self-consciousness or cognitive stuff. As I began to work with the tar paper, it began to feel that way to me. It seemed to work like I naturally work, which is over time. It had a certain kind of flexibility in it. I can grind images into it. I can grind them off. I can do things with color if I need to. I can change the shape or size. So it was very liberating. Whereas, you know, for a traditional canvas painter, you have a 6x4 foot canvas. That's it. You know, it's got to work in those confines. So I found that to be sympathetic to my nervous system and increasingly expectations of aesthetic results.
A question about how you integrate your practice with your faith, because both of you were kind of introduced as men for whom faith was important in a way that practicing the faith, living a life of faith. I'm interested in making of art, and do you see making as a form of prayer? Have you ever felt that way about the actual making of art?
Well, I mean, so I am in the Orthodox tradition, and that would be a good descriptive of the practice of making icons.
Yeah.
It really is. There are specific prayers, actually, you say as a part of that process. I don't make icons. And I would distinguish between what I would call the devotional voice and the prophetic voice. And these are manifested in the pages of the Bible. We can just go to instances. So the devotional voice would be the temple, among other things. A specific site, and it's meant to enhance the devotional life of the believer, like an icon is. In which case, it's the site of prayer, and prayer is integral to its production. The prophetic voice, that could be Isaiah wandering bare butt naked in the desert for 3 years. It could be Ezekiel trying to, cook bread over cow dung. He's not praying about that, and it's really problematic stuff for its audience, who often doesn't know what to do with him or the prophet. So they're both there in the Bible. They both have kind of things to say. But to answer your question, I would locate that expectation real specifically in the devotional voice. Whether you're making full-on work for a institutional church like the Orthodox, or I think whether you're practicing without an institutional destination as such, but you approach your activity through some form of directed prayer. And there are people who do that. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah. As a writer and curator, I have for some 30 years off and on written for Image Journal, which is based in Seattle. Its subtitle is Art, Faith, Mystery. And so each time I write on an artist, it's not the same. You know, I have to find out what are they doing with their art as a person of faith. Some of them are not Orthodox Christians, but they have been very much influenced by Christian imagery and want to address it from their standpoint as a contemporary artist living in our time. So that kind of drives how I approach it, you know, and my own work ethic as a Christian art historian and curator is to honor honestly what that artist is trying to do and convey it into the larger world. When I was the director of the gallery at Loyola Marymount University, I was there for about 16 years. Among the many kinds of exhibitions I did were regular exhibits that overtly dealt with spirituality. Some of them were Christian artists, others were, these were expressions that come out of folk religion in Brazil, in the Catholic, but very much a folk expression. And so that sensibility. So it's kind of, in my career, it's what is going on that defines how I approach it. And I just want to give it the best and most honest treatment I can to form the bridge from the work to the viewer. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Kind of taking off on that question, would you acknowledge a prophetic aspect to your work? I mean, I was thinking you kind of described it when you said how images come forth, you don't really know what they mean, and then they begin to sort of reveal themselves to you. That operates in a way like prophetic experience. Maybe think about how that's kind of true to many artists, you know, or.
Well, yeah, I sure recognize that, and any number of artists would recognize that as well, that there is a revelatory component to. I would distinguish that a little bit, and I have a small amount of discomfort with the title of the show. I think it's a good one, and I'm happy with it, but it may imply that I'm like a visionary and I, see things in my head all the time or something. That's not true. I've had a handful of, I think, inexplicable things over my lifetime, but that's not me. But absolutely, I think that if it's a vital work of art, as Dorothy Sayers actually talks about in The Mind of the Maker, the art itself generates a power as it's coming into being, and it starts to talk back to you. And so your job, or mine, is to listen, kind of to shut up and pay attention to what it wants to be. Now, in old times, in a more traditional painting, that happens, but you see it as pentimenti. The artist repented of a certain approach. He or she, usually a he, was second thinking their painting and repainting over, and then we do X-ray, shots of these paintings to see what the original form is. I think that's a form of this kind of common revelation as such. As for the way, my use of the term prophetic is pretty specific, and it doesn't have anything to do with like fortune telling.
Right.
or forward telling. It is real specifically about power structures, funding, relationship to the audience. And those are all things that the Bible documents. So I mentioned Isaiah, I guess it was, who walked around bare but naked for 3.5 years. That didn't cost anything to do. I mean, it might have cost some personal shame or something, but in terms of money, anybody can just do that. The audience was perplexed, maybe not so happy, maybe this guy's crazy, you know? And it's highly individualistic. So I tend to locate my work a bit more in that way. It is tar paper. You get it from Home Depot. It's not a high-end thing. They've jacked the price up now. I think it's $30 a roll. But, you know, back when I was painting on linen canvas, I mean,
You're talking real money.
yeah, it's real bucks. Anyhow, so maybe I should stop that. Is that doing anything?
I have a question. When I look at your work, I think about Caravaggio and how he plays with the shadow and the darkness, and you know, like as a viewer, your eye is constantly moving into those dark spaces. And so when I look at your work, you know, similar thoughts come to my mind, because especially like in the Myth and Burbia series, where there's kind of a focal point, and it's usually light, and it's something light in nature.
Yeah.
What's happening up there in the edges, and that's also the suburbia scene. And so I'm wondering, for you as a painter, artist, when you're constructing that work, do you find yourself gravitating to the darker parts of the space and building and working on that? Or are you mainly focused on the area of the color?
One thing that we're not so sensible to in these large-scale reproductions is the negative space. We'll call it the dark areas.
Sure.
I think for anybody who's seen those, they're actually active. So pretty much the whole surface has been activated. It's just different volumes of activations, quiet versus loud. Yeah. I think that makes sense.
The variations of black in the painting is very interesting. I know it reminded me of Kerry James Marshall. You know, you look at his paintings and you think they're all black, and then as you look at them closer, you see light and variations coming out. And I'm wondering, I felt like yours the same way in a different manner, but you're painting on black paper, but you're bringing out other tones from that. And so you're using some black paints, other black paint, or no black paint, or?
Yeah, good question. Let's see, let's do a couple of things with that. Well, I really did enjoy Richard Devencorn's paintings, and I really do like color, so I admire artists who use it well. I just made a decision to really edit down my language. But within that, then it's a smaller bandwidth to work with. But yes, there's modulation within that small bandwidth of dark. So the nearest analog to the natural hue of tar paper is Van Dyke Brown. A nice, cheap pigment, actually. Sometimes Mars Black will get in there too. Then there is drawing out of the tar paper some lighter, somewhat slightly effervescent areas, and that's simply thinned down oil paint, off-white, or kind of an earth red. That can get washed into it. The asphaltum in the tar paper is reactive, and it will alter that appearance. So I can also approach it in a kind of a watercolor fashion, thinking about, washes and depth. So those are the ways that I can introduce variety within that band.
Well, that's about all the time we have for tonight, so thank you so much, Duncan and Gordon.